The silence was the loudest thing in the room. It was heavier than the shouting that had just ended, thick with words unsaid and bridges burned. My uncle-in-law, Rick, a man whose hands were calloused from a lifetime of hard labor and whose opinions were just as tough, had finally stopped yelling. His face was still flushed, a roadmap of angry veins. My brother-in-law, Kyle, 17 and full of his mother's righteous indignation, stood with his fists clenched, his glare fixed on me like I was something he'd scraped off his shoe. And my husband, Liam, stood between us all. His back was to me, a solid wall protecting me from his family. I could see the tremor in his shoulders, the tension in his neck. He had just uttered the words that had shattered our fragile peace, words that had been building for 3 agonizing months. "Get out," he had said, his voice quiet but shaking with a terrifying finality. He wasn't looking at Rick. He was looking at his own mother, Sharon, and his little brother, Kyle. "Both of you. You need to leave. Now." The front door slammed shut, echoing through the house like a gunshot. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of a family breaking apart. I looked at the pristine walls of our home, the home I had so carefully built, and I couldn't help but wonder, with a sickening lurch in my stomach, how did we get here? How did an act of kindness curdle into this much poison? 3 months earlier, our home had been a sanctuary. It was a modest 3-bedroom house in Maple Creek, a quiet suburb where the biggest news was the annual bake sale. Our lives were ordered, predictable, and happy. My days were a gentle rhythm of caring for our 10-month-old daughter, Lily. I'd spend mornings watching her discover her own toes, the sunlight streaming through the nursery window, creating dust motes that danced just for her. Afternoons were for folding tiny laundry that smelled of baby soap and sunshine, and evenings were for feeling the comforting weight of Liam's arm around me as we watched some mindless show on TV. I was a project manager on maternity leave, and my current project was our life. Every corner of the house was a testament to my love for order. The spice rack was alphabetized, the throw pillows on the sofa were fluffed just so, the baby toys were corralled in their designated wicker basket at the end of each day. It wasn't about being controlling, it was about creating a calm, predictable environment where our little family could thrive. It was my haven, our haven. Liam, a software engineer, was the steady anchor to my sometimes frazzled energy. He was a man as gentle and logical as the code he wrote, a quiet presence who could soothe my anxieties with a simple touch or a dry, witty observation. We were a team. We had plans. We were meticulously saving for a bigger backyard for Lily, dreaming of family vacations to the Oregon coast where she could dip her toes in the Pacific Ocean. Our world was small, but it was perfect. The phone call came on a Tuesday night, just after midnight. The jarring, electronic ring sliced through the quiet dark of our bedroom. Liam, half asleep, fumbled for his phone on the nightstand, his voice thick and groggy. "Hello." I rolled over, watching his silhouette in the dim glow of the screen. I saw his body jolt, his posture shifting from sleepy confusion to sharp disbelief, and then to a stark, hollowed-out horror that made my own heart clench in sympathetic fear. He sat bolt upright, the blankets pooling around his waist, the color draining from his face. "What? Are they okay?" he whispered, his voice cracking with a sudden, raw terror. He listened for a long, agonizing moment, his free hand gripping the edge of the mattress as if to steady himself. When he finally hung up, he didn't move. He just stared at the wall opposite our bed, his phone slipping from his grasp and landing silently on the comforter. "Liam? What is it? What's wrong?" I asked, my own voice a whisper, afraid of the answer. He turned to look at me, his eyes wide and lost, reflecting a reality I couldn't yet see. "It's Mom's house," he said, the words barely audible, as if speaking them too loudly would make them more real. "There was a fire. It's all gone, Clara. Everything." The words hung in the air between us, heavy and incomprehensible. A house doesn't just disappear. A lifetime of memories doesn't just turn to ash and smoke. But they had. His childhood home, the place where he'd learned to ride a bike, where every holiday was celebrated with his grandmother's cooking, was gone. More importantly, his mother, Sharon, and his 17-year-old brother, Kyle, had nothing left but the pajamas they were wearing. My mind raced, trying to process the logistics of such a catastrophe, but my heart didn't hesitate for a single beat. There was no other option, no other thought that even entered my mind. Before Liam could fully process the scope of the tragedy, I was moving. I sat up, took his trembling hands in mine, and looked him straight in the eye, willing my own strength into him. "They're coming here, Liam," I said, my tone firm, leaving no room for argument or doubt. "Of course they are. Where else would they possibly go? Call your mom back right now. Tell her we're on our way to get them." He looked at me, his shocked expression softening with a flicker of immense relief. In his grief, he hadn't even been able to think that far ahead. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice fragile. "Don't be ridiculous," I said softly, squeezing his hands. "They're family." That was the simple, undeniable truth. They were family. And you show up for family. End of story. The next few hours were a blur of frantic, purposeful activity. We bundled a sleepy, confused Lily into her car seat, her little face scrunched up in protest at being woken. We drove into the night, the familiar, quiet streets of our town giving way to a scene from a disaster movie. Flashing red and blue lights painted the houses and trees in an eerie, pulsating glow. The air, even from a block away, was thick with the acrid, sickening smell of smoke and wet, charred wood. Firefighters, their faces grim and smudged with soot, were still hosing down the blackened, skeletal remains of what was once a home. We found Sharon and Kyle huddled in a neighbor's car, wrapped in borrowed, mismatched blankets. Their faces were pale, smudged with soot and streaked with tears. Sharon was in a clear state of shock, her eyes vacant and staring at the wreckage, her body trembling uncontrollably. Kyle was trying to be strong, his jaw tight, but his youthful face was drawn and pale, his eyes wide with a trauma no 17-year-old should have to witness. Seeing them like that, so utterly vulnerable and lost, broke my heart into a million pieces. We brought them home. Our quiet, orderly house was suddenly filled with the palpable chaos of tragedy. The smell of smoke clung to them, seeping into our clean air. We didn't have much extra space. Our third bedroom was Lily's nursery, a pastel-colored sanctuary I couldn't imagine displacing. So we set to work turning the large foyer, which we'd used as a small home office, into a makeshift bedroom. We dragged in a spare mattress from the basement, gathered every extra blanket and pillow we owned. The house felt crowded, claustrophobic even, but it was a warm, safe kind of crowded. It was shelter. That first night, while Liam sat with his mom on the sofa, trying to coax her to drink some warm tea, her hands shaking too much to hold the mug steady, I took action. I gathered their few smoke-damaged clothes and drove to the 24-hour laundromat. I spent hours in the sterile, fluorescent light of the deserted establishment, feeding coins into the humming machines, determined to salvage what little they had left. It was a small, practical task, but it felt monumentally important. It felt like I was washing away some of the horror, restoring a tiny piece of normalcy in a world that had been turned upside down. The next day, the real work began. Liam, ever the practical one, channeled his grief into logistics. He started a GoFundMe page, writing a heartfelt plea that he read to me with tears in his eyes. The community in Maple Creek was wonderful, and donations started trickling in almost immediately. While he managed the online front, I went to Target. I didn't hesitate to use our own credit card, figuring we'd sort out the finances later. I bought them everything I could think of: phone chargers, pajamas, socks, underwear, toothbrushes, deodorant. The little, mundane things you don't think about until they're gone. When I got home and handed Sharon a new set of soft, clean pajamas, she burst into fresh tears and hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. "Thank you, Clara," she sobbed into my shoulder. "You're a lifesaver. I don't know what we'd do without you." In that moment, I felt a powerful swell of purpose. We were doing the right thing. It was hard, it was chaotic, but it was what family did. We even went out and bought a brand new, larger capacity washer and dryer. With our household size suddenly doubled, and a baby in diapers, I knew our old, trusty machine wouldn't be able to keep up. It was a big, unplanned expense, but it seemed absolutely necessary. A practical solution to a practical problem. Within 2 days, we had them as settled as they could be. The foyer bedroom was surprisingly cozy. Their new, clean clothes were folded in storage bins. Toiletries were arranged on a small table. The GoFundMe was gaining traction. It felt like we were building a lifeboat for them, piece by piece, right in the middle of our living room. But the universe, it seemed, wasn't done testing them, or us. A few days after the fire, just as Sharon was beginning to make the first bewildering calls to her insurance company, we got another call. Her mother, Liam's grandmother, had fallen ill and was in the hospital. She had been frail for a while, but this was a sudden, serious decline. The burden fell, once again, on our new, crowded household. Liam had to work, his company had been understanding, but he couldn't take more time off after the fire. So I became the designated driver, the emotional support, the sounding board. I drove Sharon back and forth to the hospital, a grim, 40-minute drive each way down the gray highway. I sat with her for hours in sterile, uncomfortable waiting rooms, holding her hand while doctors with kind but tired eyes delivered somber news. I helped her make agonizing decisions about her mother's care, choices no daughter should have to make, especially not when she's just lost her home and everything she owns. I did it without a single complaint. I did it because it needed to be done. I saw a woman crumbling under the weight of successive tragedies, and my heart simply went out to her. My own mother lived halfway across the country, and I couldn't imagine facing something like this alone. So I stepped in. I was her surrogate daughter, her confidant, her rock. About 2 weeks after the house fire, Grandma Eleanor passed away peacefully in her sleep. It was another devastating blow, a wave of grief washing over our already strained and grieving home. Another funeral to plan. Another cascade of sympathetic phone calls. I held Sharon as she cried, her body racked with a sorrow that seemed too large for one person to bear. I kept Lily occupied and quiet in the other room to give them space to mourn. I cooked meals they didn't have the appetite to eat, just so there was food available when they were ready. I felt like I was holding the whole fragile structure of our lives together with my bare hands, trying desperately to keep it from collapsing. During those first few weeks, I ran on adrenaline and a deep, bottomless well of compassion. I was the sole cook, the housekeeper, the baby wrangler, and the grief counselor. I didn't mind. I truly didn't. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself they just needed time and space to get back on their feet. I didn't realize that while I was busy holding everything together, they were getting comfortable. I didn't see that the welcome mat we had laid out so eagerly was starting to get worn thin, trampled by footsteps that no longer bothered to wipe their feet. The first signs were small, almost too small to notice, like tiny cracks in a foundation you refuse to examine too closely. But I would soon learn that even the smallest cracks, left untended, can bring the whole house crashing down. As the initial shock and the raw, jagged edges of grief began to recede, a new reality settled in, one that was thick and uncomfortable like the humidity of a Midwestern summer. The high-stakes drama of tragedy softened into the dull, persistent friction of everyday life. Our house, once my carefully curated sanctuary of calm, was now a place of constant, low-grade chaos, a hum of disorder that set my teeth on edge. It started with the mess. I'm a tidy person. I'm not obsessive, but I function better, think more clearly, when there's a sense of order around me. It's the project manager in me, I like systems and processes. It's how my brain is wired. Sharon and Kyle, however, seem to operate in a different universe entirely, one where dirty dishes magically cleaned themselves and empty snack bags developed legs and migrated to the trash can on their own. I'd come downstairs in the morning, ready to start the day with a quiet cup of coffee before Lily woke up, only to find the remnants of their late-night snacking scattered across the living room coffee table. There would be empty, greasy chip bags, sticky soda cans leaving rings on the wood, and crusty, abandoned bowls that had once held ice cream. Kyle, who seemed to be part octopus, would leave his giant sneakers right in the middle of the hallway, a perfect, shadowy tripping hazard for me as I navigated the dark with a fussy Lily in my arms. Sharon's new collection of clothes, bought with the generous GoFundMe money, would spill out of her designated space in the foyer. A sweater would be draped over the armchair where I usually sorted the mail, a pair of shoes would block the front door, a damp towel would be left on the polished wood of the banister. At first, I cleaned it all up without a word. I told myself they were still grieving, still disoriented from their trauma. I would gather the trash, load the dishwasher for what felt like the third time that day, and move Kyle's shoes neatly to the side. I was giving them grace. But after a solid month, it was clear this wasn't a temporary state of disorientation, it was their new normal. They would walk away from a mess without a second glance, seemingly oblivious to the trail of clutter they left in their wake. I was no longer just helping family in a crisis, I was their unpaid, unacknowledged maid. A small, hard knot of resentment began to form in my stomach, a knot that tightened with every stray sock I picked up. Then there was the undeniable financial strain. Our grocery bills had more than doubled. Our utility bills, especially water and electricity, had skyrocketed. We were now feeding and housing 2 extra adults, one of whom was a 17-year-old boy with the insatiable appetite of a small horse. The brand-new, large-capacity washer and dryer I'd been so proud of ran constantly, a humming, tangible reminder of the increased load on our resources. Liam and I would sit down to look at our monthly budget, the neat columns of numbers now a chaotic mess of red ink, and a silent, heavy tension would pass between us. The GoFundMe had raised a decent amount of money, and Sharon was starting to get the first preliminary payments from her home insurance, but none of it was finding its way into the household running costs. We were shouldering the entire financial burden. That's when Liam, after a long, hesitant conversation with me where I laid out the stark reality of our finances, decided to approach his mom. He was so nervous, I felt bad for him. He rehearsed what he was going to say. He did it so gently, so carefully, when we were all sitting at the kitchen table one afternoon while Lily was napping. "Mom," he began, stirring his coffee with meticulous care. "Clara and I were looking over the insurance paperwork with you the other day, and we saw the Section 4, additional living expenses. Since you're staying with us, you can claim rent from the insurance company. They pay it directly. It wouldn't cost you anything out of your pocket, but it would really help us out with the extra bills for groceries and everything." I held my breath, watching Sharon's face. It seemed perfectly reasonable. Logical, even. It was a standard part of most homeowners' policies for exactly this kind of situation. It was a victimless solution. Sharon's pleasant smile, which had been fixed on her face a moment before, tightened almost imperceptibly at the corners. "Oh," she said, her voice a little cooler, losing its warmth. "Rent? You want me to pay rent in my own son's house?" No, it's not like that, Mom," Liam said quickly, backtracking. "It's not you paying. It's the insurance company. It's what that money is for. It's money they've already set aside to cover your housing while your place is rebuilt. It just helps us cover the actual costs of having everyone here." She looked from Liam's earnest face to mine, and her eyes lingered on me for a fraction of a second too long. I felt a sudden, irrational need to defend myself, as if I were the one making an unreasonable demand. "We love having you here, Sharon, really," I added, my voice sounding a little too bright and cheerful. "It's just that things add up so quickly, and this would be a huge, huge help." She finally let out a long, martyred sigh, a sound of profound suffering. "Well, if you need the money, I suppose I have no choice. Just tell me what paperwork you need me to sign." The conversation was over, but the air in the room felt different. An invisible transaction had taken place. We were no longer just compassionate family offering unconditional shelter, we were now landlords. And she, in her eyes, had become a tenant. It was a subtle shift in dynamics, but it changed everything. A few weeks later, a substantial check from the insurance company arrived. Sharon did give us an amount for rent, the amount we had all agreed upon. But she also went on a significant shopping spree. There were new, expensive clothes, a brand new iPad for Kyle, and several nights where they would go out for lavish dinners. I tried not to let it bother me. It was her money, after all. But it was hard to watch her walk in with shopping bags from a high-end department store when I was meticulously planning our grocery list around coupons and sales to stay within our severely strained budget. The rent talk inevitably led to the chores talk. I simply couldn't continue being the sole person responsible for cooking every meal and cleaning the entire house. I was physically and emotionally exhausted. My maternity leave was supposed to be a precious time to bond with my daughter, but I felt more like a short-order cook and a full-time janitor. So, with Liam's full backing, I created a simple, clear meal schedule and taped it to the refrigerator. It seemed like the fairest solution. I divided the week into 3 parts, 2 nights for Liam and I, 2 nights for Sharon and Kyle, and the other 3 days for leftovers, takeout, or fend for yourself. The first week it was our turn, I cooked every night. When their week came around, the entire plan fell apart on day 1. On their first designated night, I came home from a grocery run with Lily to an empty house. There were no signs of dinner being prepared, no pleasant smells wafting from the kitchen. An hour later, as I was starting to get worried, Sharon and Kyle walked in, carrying greasy paper bags from a popular local burger joint. "Oh, hi," Sharon said cheerfully, as if nothing was amiss. "We just had a sudden craving for burgers. The line at that place was so long." I stared at the bags in her hand, then at the cold, empty stove. Liam was on his way home from work, undoubtedly tired and hungry, expecting a meal. I had a hungry baby to feed and now, nothing to give her father. "I thought it was your night to cook," I said, trying my best to keep my voice even and free of accusation. "Oh, right," Sharon said, waving a dismissive hand as she pulled her own burger from the bag. "We just didn't feel like cooking tonight. You guys can just grab something for yourselves, can't you?" There was no apology. No forewarning. No consideration whatsoever. Just the casual, breezy assumption that we would fend for ourselves. That night, after I'd fed Lily and put her to bed, Liam and I ate cold sandwiches over the kitchen sink, the silence between us thick with my frustration and his conflicted, miserable loyalty. This became their established pattern. On their designated cooking weeks, it was a 50-50 chance at best whether they would actually make a meal. More often than not, they'd go out to eat, just the 2 of them, leaving us to scramble for dinner at the last minute. The neat little schedule on the fridge became a monument to my failed attempt at creating fairness and structure. It was a silent, daily reminder that we were living by 2 completely different sets of rules in the same house. The tension was becoming a physical presence. It was in the way I'd close a cabinet a little too forcefully. It was in the way Liam would retreat to his computer in the basement after another non-meal from his mom. It was in the tight, polite smile Sharon would give me, a smile that never, ever reached her eyes. Kyle, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, became more sullen and withdrawn, communicating mostly in grunts unless he needed something from us. Our home no longer felt like our own. It felt like a tense, crowded, and deeply unhappy boarding house where I was the unwilling, unpaid manager. I found myself retreating more and more into the nursery, closing the door just to have a small pocket of peace with Lily. That room, with its soft colors and quiet mobiles, was the only space left in the entire house that still felt like mine. The rest of the house had become a contested territory of unspoken resentments and clashing expectations. I started to feel a deep, creeping loneliness, and isolation within my own home. Liam was trying, I knew he was. He would help clean up the messes when he saw them, he would try to talk to Kyle about his responsibilities, but he was fundamentally conflict-averse. He didn't want to rock the boat with his grieving mother. "Just give it a little more time, Clara," he'd say, his voice pleading. "They're still figuring things out." But they weren't figuring things out. They were settling in. They were establishing a new status quo, one that worked very well for them and was slowly but surely draining the life out of me. The breaking point was building, brick by painful brick, with every unwashed dish, every broken promise on the chore chart, every casual act of daily inconsideration. I just didn't know that the final, crushing weight was about to be delivered by a visitor we hadn't even met yet. A visitor who would take all the little, hairline cracks in our foundation and smash a sledgehammer right through them. One evening, Sharon was on the phone in the living room, her voice a little louder than usual, carrying clearly into the kitchen where I was making a bottle for Lily. She was talking to her brother, Rick. "Oh, it's so hard, Rick," she sighed, her voice laced with a dramatic, long-suffering quaver. "It's so generous of Liam and Clara to take us in, of course. I'm so grateful. But it's not the same. You just feel like you're in the way all the time." No, she's a wonderful girl, really, but she likes things a certain way. Yes, very particular. It's just stressful, you know. Walking on eggshells." My hands stilled on the bottle. Particular? Was that what I was? Particular for wanting a clean house and a hot meal for my family? Particular for not wanting to live in a pigsty? The knot of resentment in my stomach burned a little hotter. She was painting a picture of herself as a long-suffering, gracious guest, and me as a difficult, demanding, shrewish host. The narrative was being written, and I had already been cast as the villain. I didn't know it then, but she was setting the stage for the final act. And her star witness was on his way. The arrival of Uncle Rick was not a surprise, but the shift in the atmosphere was immediate and palpable. He showed up on a Saturday morning, his dusty Ford F-150 rumbling into our quiet, suburban driveway like a war machine. He was a large, imposing man, built solid from years of construction work, with a weathered face and eyes that seemed to take in everything and judge it instantly. He enveloped Sharon in a theatrical bear hug on our front lawn, patting Kyle on the back with a heavy, thudding hand. His greeting to me was a curt, dismissive nod. To Liam, it was a firm, slightly challenging handshake. "Good of you to take care of your mom, boy," he said, his tone implying it was the absolute bare minimum of Liam's filial duty, a debt long overdue. The house, already feeling crowded, immediately felt 10 times smaller. It was as if Rick's oversized personality and preconceived notions sucked all the oxygen out of the rooms. He was a walking, talking validation of every simmering grievance Sharon had been nursing for the past 2 months. He sat at our kitchen table like he owned it, and Sharon held court. She recounted her tale of woe, a carefully edited and masterfully performed monologue. It was a version of events where her own daily oversights were completely omitted and my attempts at creating a livable, functional structure for 5 people were framed as rigid, cold-hearted cruelty. "She charges you rent?" I heard him ask later that morning, his voice a low, incredulous growl from the living room. He and Sharon were having coffee. I was in the kitchen, just a few feet away, pretending to be absorbed in washing Lily's bottles, but my ears were burning with a hot, helpless anger. "Well, it's from the insurance," Sharon said, her voice dripping with a false, martyred fairness that was far more infuriating than outright complaint. "But still. It just feels transactional. You know. In your own son's house. It's disrespectful, Sharon, is what it is," Rick declared, his voice rising with indignation. "That's the bottom line. After everything you did for that boy. Paying for half his college, raising him right after his father passed. He owes you. They both do." I felt a hot flush of rage creep up my neck. They were discussing me, discussing our private finances, our private family arrangements, as if I were a naughty child to be disciplined or a gold digger to be exposed. Liam was out in the garage, trying to fix a sputtering lawnmower, blissfully unaware of the tribunal being held in his own living room. A fierce, protective urge rose in me. I wanted to storm in there, to slam the utility bills down on the table, to point to the useless cooking schedule on the fridge, to lay out the undeniable truth of the endless messes, the broken promises, the sheer lack of consideration. But what was the point? Rick had arrived with his verdict already decided. He wasn't here to listen. He was here to pass judgment. And I was already guilty. The day wore on in a state of strained, suffocating politeness. I made a big lunch for everyone, a pot of chili with all the fixings, and was met with a noncommittal grunt of acknowledgement from Rick. He watched my every move with an unnerving intensity. He saw me wipe down the kitchen counter after Kyle spilled some juice, and he shared a significant, knowing look with Sharon. He saw me quietly pick up a stray sock from the living room floor, and he pursed his lips in disapproval, as if my tidiness was a personal affront to their suffering. I felt like an insect under a microscope, every action scrutinized and found wanting. I wasn't a caregiver, I was a warden. The loneliness I had been feeling for weeks deepened into a profound sense of isolation. Liam, when he came inside, was oblivious. He was happy to see his uncle, to have another male presence in the house. They talked about sports and trucks, falling into an easy rapport that excluded me completely. I felt like a stranger in my own home, a service provider whose efforts were not only unappreciated but actively resented. The house was no longer a democracy, however dysfunctional. It was their territory now. They had the numbers. It was 3 of them against me, with Liam stuck in a neutral zone, unwilling to see the battle lines being drawn. My resentment began to curdle into something harder. I stopped going the extra mile. I cooked for Liam, Lily, and myself. I cleaned up our messes. I did our laundry. I let their side of the house, their corner of the living room, their dishes in the sink, accumulate. It was a petty, passive-aggressive protest, born of sheer exhaustion. I was done being the maid. Of course, this only fed their narrative. My withdrawal wasn't seen as a consequence of their inaction, but as further proof of my cold, unwelcoming nature. See? I heard Sharon whisper to Rick one afternoon. She didn't even wash my coffee cup. It's been sitting there since this morning. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shriek that my hands were raw from washing 100 other things for her, that I was drowning in chores while she sat there passing judgment. But I said nothing. I just retreated further into myself, into the nursery with Lily, my last remaining sanctuary. I tried to talk to Liam that night, after everyone else was asleep. I tried to make him understand what was happening. Liam, your uncle, he's making things so much worse, I whispered in the dark of our bedroom. He and your mom, they just sit there all day, talking about how awful I am. Liam sighed, a sound of pure weariness. Clara, he's just trying to support her. His sister just lost her home. He's emotional. Can't you just ignore it? For me. Just for a couple more days until he leaves. Ignore it? My voice rose, sharp with disbelief. How am I supposed to ignore it when he's sitting in my living room, telling your mother that you owe her and that I'm being disrespectful for trying to keep this house from falling into complete chaos? He's turning her against us, Liam. He's validating every selfish instinct she has. You're being dramatic, he said, and the words hit me like a slap. It's just talk. They're blowing off steam. It's not a big deal. It is a big deal to me. I said, sitting up now, the anger making me tremble. This is my home too. And I feel like I'm being pushed out. I feel like an unwanted guest. And you're just letting it happen. You're not defending me. You're not even seeing what's going on. What do you want me to do, Clara? He asked, his voice rising to match mine. Kick my grieving mother's supportive brother out of my house? Is that what you want? The argument evolved from there, a circular, painful exchange that went nowhere. He accused me of being intolerant and inflexible. I accused him of being blind and unsupportive. We ended up sleeping with a wide, cold canyon of space between us in the bed. For the first time, I felt a crack in the foundation of our marriage. He wasn't my teammate anymore. He had chosen to be a neutral observer, and in a war, neutrality is just an abdication. It's choosing the side of the aggressor. The next day, the atmosphere was thick with a new, personal tension between Liam and me, layered on top of the existing family drama. I was polite but distant with him. He was sullen and avoidant. It was a miserable, unsustainable state of affairs. The final straw, the event that would lead to the ultimate implosion, wasn't one big, dramatic thing. It was a small, almost trivial moment of casual, breathtaking rudeness. It happened late that afternoon. I had just, after a monumental struggle, gotten Lily down for her nap. She was teething and fussy, and the process had taken nearly an hour of rocking, shushing, and singing. The house was finally, blessedly quiet. I sank onto the living room sofa, closing my eyes, craving just 5 minutes of peace before I had to start thinking about dinner. Sharon, Rick, and Kyle were sitting at the kitchen table, looking at something on Kyle's new iPad. They had been talking in low, conspiratorial voices, but now Kyle stood up and walked over to the TV. He grabbed the remote, turned it on, and blasted the volume on some loud, obnoxious action movie. The sound of explosions, gunfire, and screeching tires filled the house, rattling the very walls. My eyes shot open in disbelief. Lily's room was right above the living room. The floorboards vibrated with the sound. "Kyle, could you please turn that down?" I asked, trying my best to keep my voice calm and reasonable. "Lily's sleeping right upstairs." He glanced at me, a flicker of annoyance on his face, then back at the screen. He nudged the volume down by a single, token notch. It was still incredibly, jarringly loud. "Kyle, please," I said, a little more firmly this time, sitting up. "I just spent an hour getting her to sleep. Can you please use headphones? Or maybe watch it on your iPad?" Before he could answer, Sharon spoke up from the kitchen table, her voice syrupy sweet with condescension. "Oh, let him be, Clara. He's a teenager. He just wants to unwind a little." I stared at her, dumbfounded by the complete lack of consideration. "He can unwind quietly," I said, my patience shredding like wet paper. "The baby needs to sleep. It's not an unreasonable request." This is when Rick decided it was time to put me in my place. He pushed his chair back with a loud scrape and stood up, looming over the table. "The boy's lost his home, his grandmother, everything, for God's sake. I think he's entitled to watch a little TV in his own brother's house without being henpecked." Henpecked. The word hung in the air, ugly and misogynistic. His own brother's house. Not our house. Liam's house. I was just a guest here, it seemed. A guest with too many rules and a grating voice. "It is my house too," I said, my voice dangerously quiet, all the exhaustion and frustration of the past months coalescing into a single, hard point of anger. "And my daughter is trying to sleep." That was it. That was the spark that lit the fuse. The point of no return. The moment the words left my mouth, I knew I had crossed a line. Not a line of rudeness, but a line of submission. I had stopped pleading and started demanding. I had asserted my place in the home, not as a caregiver or a host, but as an equal owner. And in their eyes, that was the greatest sin of all. Kyle, who had been content to let his mother and uncle fight his battles, was suddenly emboldened. He was fueled by their righteousness, by the narrative that they were the victims and I was their tormentor. He turned away from the television, his face, usually placid and a little vacant, now contorted with a teenage rage that was startling in its intensity. He took 2 aggressive steps toward me, closing the distance between us until he was standing over me on the sofa. He was taller than me now, a fact I hadn't fully registered until that moment. For a split second, as he stood over me, pointing a trembling finger right in my face, I felt a genuine flicker of physical fear. "You know what? You're the problem," he yelled, his voice cracking with a mixture of adolescent uncertainty and raw fury. Spittle flew from his mouth. You're always on my case. Everything I do is wrong. I can't eat, I can't watch TV, I can't do anything. This place is like a prison, and you're the warden. A prison? I shot back, the fear instantly replaced by a white-hot anger. I stood up, so we were face to face, my heart hammering against my ribs. A prison where you get free food, a roof over your head, and a maid who cleans up after you every single day? I don't think so, Kyle. You have no idea what a prison is. My voice was shaking, but it was loud. All the pent-up frustration from the past months, every dirty dish, every skipped chore, every condescending comment was pouring out of me. You see? Sharon cried out from the kitchen, her voice trembling with manufactured hurt as she looked at Rick. She was performing for him, her star witness. You see what I have to live with? This is what I get for just trying to survive. That's enough, Clara, Rick boomed, taking a step forward himself. He was flanking Kyle, creating a united, intimidating front. You've got no call to talk to him that way. You should be ashamed of yourself. I felt cornered. Trapped. The three of them were a solid wall of blame and indignation. I looked past them, through the dining room, toward the back of the house, my eyes searching, pleading for Liam. Where was he? Why couldn't he hear this? And that's when he walked in. He came in through the back door from the garage, wiping grease from his hands with an old rag. He was smiling, about to say something about the lawnmower. The smile froze on his face. He took in the scene in a single, horrified, slow-motion glance, Rick standing like a bouncer, his mother with tears in her eyes, me backed into the sofa, my face flushed with anger, and his little brother, his own flesh and blood, yelling directly into my face. Something inside him, something I had never seen before, broke. The conflict-averse, gentle, peace-at-all-costs Liam vanished. In his place was a husband and a father who had just been pushed too far. Kyle, Liam said. His voice wasn't loud. It was low and hard and carried a weight that silenced the room instantly. It was the voice of a man who had reached his absolute limit. Kyle froze, his mouth still open, his angry words dying in his throat. He turned, surprised, to face his older brother. Don't you ever, Liam said, taking a deliberate step into the room, his eyes locked on Kyle's, ever speak to my wife like that again. Do you understand me? The authority in his voice was absolute. Kyle, who had been so full of bluster a second ago, visibly shrank. He stammered, but she started it. She was yelling at me. I don't care who started it, Liam cut him off, his voice dangerously calm. He took another step, placing himself directly between me and his brother. I could feel the protective heat radiating from his back. You are a guest in this house. This is her home. You will show her respect. You will show me respect. Pack a bag. I want you to go stay at a friend's house for the night. You can come back and get your things tomorrow, when you've learned how to behave in a civilized manner. The shock in the room was a physical thing. It was a gasp of cold air. No one had expected this from Liam. He was the peacemaker, the mediator. He was the one who always smoothed things over. Least of all, it seemed, had his mother expected it. Sharon shot to her feet, her face a mask of disbelief and outrage. Liam. You can't be serious. You're kicking your own brother out. Over a little argument? Liam turned his gaze from Kyle to her, and for the first time since they had arrived, I saw him look at his mother not as a dutiful son, but as a man whose deepest loyalties had been challenged. The fog of guilt and obligation that had clouded his judgment for months finally cleared. Yes, Mom, I am, he said, his voice flat and unyielding. He stood in my living room and screamed in my wife's face. It's not a little argument. It's unacceptable. And it's over. This is because of her. Sharon cried, her voice rising to a shrill pitch. She pointed a trembling, accusatory finger at me. She's done this. She's turned you against your own family. She's been trying to get rid of us since the day we got here. It was the final, fatal mistake. In her panic, she had overplayed her hand. She had laid down an ultimatum. Her or me. She had forced him to choose. Liam's jaw tightened. He looked at his mother's contorted, blaming face. He looked over his shoulder at my exhausted, tear-streaked one. He looked at the chaos that had consumed our lives, our home, our marriage. And he made his choice. He spoke the words from my memory, the words that had started this whole story. The words that would echo in my mind for years to come. If you feel that way, Mom, he said, his voice now devoid of all emotion but a chilling, heartbreaking resolve, then you can find another place to stay, too. The silence that followed was absolute, profound, and terrifying. It was the silence of a detonated bomb. Rick looked utterly stunned, his mouth hanging open. Sharon's face went from red to a sickly, pale white, as if he had physically struck her. Kyle just stared at his brother, his teenage anger deflating into a look of complete, wounded disbelief. He looked like a lost little boy again. Liam had drawn a line in the sand. Not in the sand, but in the hardwood floor of our living room. He had built a wall around me, around Lily, around our little family of 3. And he had just told his mother and his brother that they were on the other side of it. Without another word, her face a frozen mask of tragedy, Sharon turned on her heel and walked with a stiff, unnatural dignity toward the foyer bedroom. Kyle, looking utterly lost and on the verge of tears, hesitated for a moment, then followed her. Rick stood there, his face a battleground of fury and confusion. He looked at Liam, then at me, then back at Liam. He opened his mouth as if to say something, to unleash another tirade, but he seemed to realize it was useless. The battle was over. His side had lost. He turned and stomped out the front door, slamming it so hard that a picture frame on the wall rattled. Liam and I were left standing in the living room, the frantic sound of the still blaring television the only thing filling the void. He walked over with robotic steps and pressed the power button. The silence, heavy and suffocating, rushed back in. We could hear the sounds of drawers opening and closing, of bags being zipped with angry, violent tugs. It didn't take them long. They didn't have much to pack, after all. Most of what they owned was still in donation bags and boxes. Within 15 minutes, they were walking out the front door. Sharon was in the lead, her back ramrod straight, her eyes fixed forward, refusing to look at us. Kyle trailed behind her, his head down, carrying a duffel bag and a backpack. He risked one quick, wounded glance at Liam before his mother pulled him out the door. The door clicked shut. It was a soft sound, but it felt as final as a guillotine. Liam stood there, staring at the closed door, his whole body trembling with the aftershocks of the confrontation. I walked over to him and gently put my hand on his arm. He finally turned to look at me, his eyes filled with a universe of pain and regret and a deep, bottomless sorrow. "I'm sorry, Clara," he whispered, his voice breaking on the last word. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I let it get this far." I just shook my head, my own throat too tight for words. I pulled him into a hug, and he clung to me, his body shaking with silent, racking sobs. He cried for his mother, for his brother, for the family he had just broken in order to save our own. Upstairs, through the baby monitor on the coffee table, I could hear Lily starting to stir, her soft coos a sound from another, more innocent world. Our home was quiet again. But it wasn't peaceful. It was the hollow, aching quiet of a fresh, gaping wound. The first few days after they left were surreal. The house was quiet, but it was an unnatural, heavy quiet, like the air after a violent thunderstorm. The absence of their presence was a presence in itself, a ghost that haunted every room. I would walk into the living room and my eyes would automatically flick to the corner of the sofa where Kyle usually sat, or to the armchair where Sharon would read on her iPad. Their absence was a void, a negative space that reshaped the geography of our home. The foyer, which had served as their makeshift bedroom for 3 months, was the strangest space of all. Together, Liam and I stripped the mattress and folded the blankets, our movements slow and funereal. But even with the bed gone, the space still held the imprint of them. A faint, lingering scent of Sharon's floral perfume. A single, forgotten sock of Kyle's that had been kicked under the desk. I picked it up and held it for a moment, the cheap fabric a tangible link to the boy who had just vanished from our lives. I dropped it into a trash can, and the small sound it made felt final and deeply sad. Liam moved through the house like a zombie, his body on autopilot. He went to work, he came home, he played with Lily with a forced, hollow cheerfulness, but his eyes were distant, shadowed with a grief I could only begin to understand. I knew he believed he had done the right thing, the only thing he could do. But that knowledge didn't erase the pain. He had chosen to protect me, to protect us, but that choice had required him to surgically remove his own mother and brother from his life. It was a wound that festered in the oppressive silence. I tried to be what he needed. I tried to be a soft place for him to land. I made his favorite meals, meals we hadn't been able to enjoy for months. I didn't press him to talk about it. I just sat with him in the evenings after Lily was asleep, my hand on his knee, offering a silent solidarity. But at night, long after he thought I was asleep, I would hear him. A quiet, muffled sound from his side of the bed. The sound of a man trying to cry without making a noise, his shoulders shaking in the dark. My own emotions were a tangled, contradictory mess. There was, I am ashamed to admit, a profound and overwhelming sense of relief, a feeling so strong it made me feel deeply guilty. I could breathe in my own home again. I could walk barefoot across the floor without stepping on something sticky or sharp. I could leave Lily to play on her mat in the living room without worrying about what she might find and put in her mouth. The constant, low-level stress that had become my background noise for 3 months was gone. The house was mine again. It was ours. The sense of order I craved was restored. But beneath that selfish relief was a heavy, suffocating blanket of guilt. Had I been too harsh? Too particular, as Sharon had so damningly put it? Had I pushed them away with my need for structure and cleanliness? I replayed every conversation, every interaction, in a relentless, punishing loop. I searched for the moment I could have done things differently. Should I have just kept cleaning up after them without complaint? Should I have just accepted the broken meal schedule and the constant mess as the price of doing a good deed? Did I have the right to demand respect in a situation born from such profound tragedy? The questions circled in my head, a relentless carousel of self-doubt. Was I the villain of this story after all? The silence from their side was absolute and terrifying. No angry phone calls. No pleading texts. Not a single word. We knew, through a brief, awkward text message from Liam's cousin, that they were staying with Uncle Rick. We also knew, from that same cousin, what story they were telling. It was the one they had been rehearsing for weeks, that I was a controlling, cold-hearted nightmare and that Liam, completely bewitched and manipulated by his horrible wife, had thrown his own homeless mother and little brother out onto the street in a fit of rage. The effects of this narrative began to ripple through the family. Some of Liam's relatives, the ones who only heard Rick and Sharon's side, started treating us differently. Aunts who used to call regularly to check in went silent. An invitation to a family baptism was never extended. We were being quietly, systematically excommunicated, judged and sentenced without a trial. About 2 weeks after the fight, Liam, his face pale and drawn, decided he had to try. He couldn't live with the total, deafening silence. I watched him from across the room as he sat on the edge of the bed, staring at his phone, his thumb hovering over his mother's contact photo. He finally pressed it, his face a mask of raw anxiety. It rang and rang, the sound echoing in our quiet bedroom, before it finally went to voicemail. He didn't leave a message. He just hung up, his shoulders slumping. He tried again the next day. This time, to my surprise, she answered. I could only hear his side of the conversation, and it was excruciating to witness. Mom. Hi, it's me. Yeah, I'm okay. I wanted to see how you are. Okay. No, Mom, that's not what happened. Mom, can you please just listen for a second? I'm not asking you to. I'm not choosing her over you. I'm trying to keep my family, my whole family, together. Okay, Mom, I understand. He hung up the phone, his hand dropping to his side. He looked defeated, hollowed out. She said she has nothing to say to me until I apologize to her. And Kyle, he said, his voice flat, devoid of all emotion. Apologize for what? I asked, my heart sinking into my stomach. For kicking them out. For taking your side. He sank into a chair, running his hands through his hair in a gesture of pure despair. She said I let you disrespect them in my own house and that I betrayed her. She said I'm not the son she raised. The injustice of it was a physical blow. It took my breath away. Apologize? For what? For defending his wife from being verbally abused in her own home? For finally drawing a line after months of being taken for granted, disrespected, and ignored? That was the moment I understood, with a terrible, cold clarity, that this wasn't going to be fixed. There would be no heartfelt reunion around a kitchen table. There would be no tearful apologies and mutual understanding. Sharon wasn't looking for an apology, she was looking for a complete and total surrender. She wanted Liam to admit that he was wrong, which would, by extension, mean admitting that I was the problem. She wanted him to crawl back, to beg for forgiveness, to restore the status quo where her comfort and her feelings came before our peace, before our marriage. It was a power play, plain and simple, disguised as wounded motherhood. And Liam, to his eternal credit, saw it too. The raw pain in his eyes was still there, but it was now mingled with a new, hard resolve. He had made his choice on that terrible Saturday afternoon, and as painful as it was, he wasn't going to unmake it. He had chosen his new family. He had chosen me. Our life slowly found a new, quieter rhythm. A wounded rhythm. We celebrated Lily's first birthday a few weeks later. It was a small, subdued affair. Just the three of us, a couple of my close friends, and their kids. There was a gaping, painful hole where her paternal grandparents and uncle should have been. As I watched Liam hold Lily, helping her tiny, clumsy hands smush a piece of birthday cake into her mouth, I saw the flicker of profound sadness in his smile. He was happy in this moment, deliriously in love with our daughter. But a part of him was also mourning the family he had lost, the family he had always imagined for our children. He was celebrating a beginning while also grieving an ending. We became an island. The two of us, and Lily, against a silent, disapproving tide of our extended family. Our own bond deepened, forged in the fire of this shared trauma. We learned to rely on each other completely, with an intensity we never had before. Liam, who had always been a little reserved with his emotions, started talking more. He began to open up about the guilt he felt, not for kicking them out, but for not protecting me sooner, for not seeing what was happening. I saw it, you know, he confessed one night, as we lay in the dark, our bodies turned toward each other. I saw how tired you were. I saw how unhappy you were getting. And I just kept telling you to be patient. I was a coward, Clara. I was so scared of that confrontation, so scared of that ugly scene, that I just let you suffer instead. I let them hurt you. You weren't a coward, I whispered, tracing the line of his jaw in the dark. You were caught in an impossible situation. You were grieving, too. No, he said, his voice firm, full of a self-awareness that was both painful and healing. It wasn't impossible. It was just hard. And I chose the easy path for way too long. I'm sorry. I am so sorry I didn't stand up for you sooner. His apology, so freely given, meant more to me than he would ever know. It validated everything I had been feeling. It erased the nagging self-doubt. It made me feel seen. We were a team again, a true one this time, united by a shared purpose and a shared sorrow. But our newfound strength had been bought at a terrible price. Months bled into one another, the sharp edges of the confrontation dulling into a chronic, low-grade ache. Our house was calm. Lily was thriving in the quiet, predictable environment. Our marriage, having survived the crucible, felt stronger and more honest than ever before. On the surface, we had won. We had peace. But it was a fragile peace, haunted by the ghosts of what we'd lost. The silence from Liam's family remained absolute. It was a solid, impenetrable wall. One day, an envelope arrived in the mail. It was a plain white business envelope with no return address. The postmark was from the town where Uncle Rick lived. Inside, there was no card, no note, just a personal check written in Sharon's familiar, looping handwriting. It was made out to me, for the exact amount of money I had spent on them in those first few days for essentials like pajamas and phone chargers, an amount she had already paid me back from the GoFundMe funds. I stared at the check, my blood running cold. This wasn't a repayment. It was a statement. It was a calculated, petty gesture designed to sever the last, lingering thread of obligation between us. It was her way of saying, I owe you nothing. Our slate is clean. You did not help me out of kindness, you engaged in a transaction, and now it is finished. I showed it to Liam when he got home from work. He looked at the check, his face expressionless. He didn't say a word. He simply took out his phone, endorsed the check with a flick of his thumb, and deposited it via the banking app. Then he put his phone down and started helping me with dinner, as if nothing had happened. We never spoke of it again, but that small piece of paper was a final confirmation. This wasn't a temporary estrangement. This was a permanent divorce from his family. The final, tragic chapter of their story, at least this part of it, came to us the way all the news did, through the family grapevine. Liam's cousin Sarah, the one who had tried to remain neutral, called him one evening. Her voice was hesitant and full of a pity that was almost as painful as condemnation. Uncle Rick's hospitality, it turned out, had an expiration date. His rigid, traditional sense of family duty did not extend to housing two able-bodied people indefinitely, especially when they made no effort to contribute. Living with Sharon's constant, simmering negativity and Kyle's sullen, teenage entitlement had worn him down. According to Sarah, the insurance money, which should have been a down payment on a new, small home or apartment for them, had been squandered. It was spent not on rebuilding a life, but on a desperate, futile attempt to numb their pain with material things, the newest gadgets, brand-name clothes, expensive meals out to maintain the illusion that they weren't truly destitute. When the money ran out, so did Rick's patience. There was another fight. A different house, a different argument, but the same toxic dynamic. And this time, Sharon and Kyle were asked to leave his house, too. They ended up in a dingy, one-bedroom apartment on the other side of town, in a complex known for its peeling paint and transient tenants. Sharon, who had lived a comfortable middle-class life and hadn't had to work a day in 30 years thanks to Liam's late father's life insurance, had to get a part-time job. She became a cashier at a discount grocery store. The humiliation, Sarah said, had made her even more bitter. And she blamed us for all of it. In her mind, her downfall wasn't a result of the fire or her own poor choices, it was a direct consequence of our cruelty. We hadn't just kicked her out, we had pushed her off a cliff. The effect on Kyle was even more devastating. Without Liam's steadying influence, which he had always rebelled against but secretly relied upon, he was completely adrift. Without any real structure or discipline, he fell in with a bad crowd. His grades, which had already been slipping, plummeted. He started skipping school. He was caught shoplifting. The bright, if sometimes thoughtless, boy we knew was disappearing, replaced by a sullen, angry young man whose only inheritance from his mother was a deep and abiding sense of resentment. He was on a fast track to nowhere, and the one person who could have helped him most, his own brother, had been forced to cut him off to save himself and his own family. It was a tragedy of their own making, a self-fulfilling prophecy of victimhood, but it felt like a collective failure. A profound waste. One cold evening, almost a year to the day after they had left, Liam was standing by the living room window, looking out at the first heavy snowfall of the season. Our house was warm and cozy. The Christmas tree we just put up blinked softly in the corner, its lights reflecting in the dark glass. Lily was asleep upstairs, safe in her bed. Everything was peaceful. Everything was perfect. But I saw the look on his face. He was holding that old photograph from his wallet, the one I had only seen a few times. It was a picture of him, Sharon, and a much younger, gap-toothed Kyle, all of them grinning at a family barbecue in a backyard that no longer existed. A single tear traced a slow, silent path down his cheek, illuminated by the colored lights of the tree. I walked over and stood beside him, placing my hand on his back. I didn't need to ask what he was thinking. I knew. I could feel his sorrow as if it were my own. He had won. He had protected his home, his wife, his child. He had the peace he had fought so hard for. But in the quiet of our perfect little house, he was mourning the ashes of the family he had to burn down to get it. And I knew, as I stood there sharing his silent, inconsolable sorrow, that some victories feel exactly like a defeat. Our sanctuary was secure, but it would forever be haunted by the ghosts of those we had been forced to leave out in the cold. The house of cards had fallen, and we were left standing alone in the wreckage. The years that followed did not bring healing, not in the way you read about in stories. They didn't close the wound. They just built up scar tissue around it, thick and tough and inflexible. The rift between Liam and his mother and brother didn't lessen with time, it widened into a chasm, silent and seemingly permanent. Life continued, as it always does, a relentless forward march. But it was a life fundamentally altered, a life defined by a permanent amputation. There were birthdays, holidays, and milestones, and at every single one, we felt a phantom limb ache for the family that wasn't there. We had another child, a boy we named Sam. He was a cheerful, boisterous toddler who filled our now quiet house with the welcome noise of laughter and toy trucks crashing into walls. He was a joy, a bright light. But he would never know his paternal grandmother. He would never have his Uncle Kyle to toss a ball with in the backyard we were finally able to afford. To him, Sharon and Kyle were just faded, smiling faces in old photographs that Liam kept tucked away in a memory box in our closet. Sometimes, late at night when he thought I wasn't looking, I would find Liam in the office, the box open on his desk, sifting through the relics of a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. It was a somber, private ritual of remembrance. The updates we got about Sharon and Kyle were sporadic and grim, delivered in hushed, hesitant tones by Liam's cousin Sarah, the last remaining bridge between our two fractured worlds. Sharon kept her job at the grocery store. Her bitterness didn't soften with time, it hardened and calcified into a brittle shell. She became one of those women you sometimes see whose faces are permanently set in a mask of sour disappointment. She aged quickly, worn down not by hard labor, but by the corrosive, internal power of her own unrelenting resentment. She told anyone who would listen that her eldest son and his cruel wife had abandoned her in her darkest hour, a narrative she had repeated so many times that she now believed it as an undisputed, historical fact. Kyle's story was the one that truly broke Liam's heart. He never went back to finish high school. He drifted from one dead-end, minimum-wage job to another flipping burgers, stocking shelves at a big-box store, doing temporary labor when he could get it. He was trapped in a cycle of aimlessness, fueled by the poisonous narrative his mother had fed him his entire life, that the world, and specifically his successful older brother, owed him something. He got into minor trouble with the law, a few times petty theft from a convenience store, a DUI that resulted in a suspended license. Each time Liam heard the news from Sarah, I would see a piece of him die. He felt a profound, helpless guilt, the crushing weight of the what-ifs. What if he had been there to guide him? What if he had found another way to handle things that day? What if he had just tolerated the abuse a little longer for Kyle's sake? One day, when Kyle was around 21, Liam's phone rang. It was a number he didn't recognize. He answered it, and his face went pale. It was Kyle. His voice, Liam told me later, was rough and unfamiliar, coated with a cheap bitterness. He wasn't calling to reconnect. He wasn't calling to apologize. He was calling for money. He was in some kind of trouble, a gambling debt he couldn't pay, and the people he owed were getting impatient. Liam was torn. Every paternal, big brother instinct in his body screamed at him to write a check, to fix it, to make the problem go away. But I saw the deep conflict in his eyes. This wasn't a one-time crisis, it was a symptom of a much deeper disease, a disease of learned helplessness and entitlement. Giving him money now would be like putting a band-aid on a cancerous lesion. It would solve the immediate problem but would only enable the destructive behavior to continue. It wouldn't be helping, it would be harming. I can't just give you money, Kyle, Liam said into the phone, his voice strained with a terrible, paternal firmness. I won't do that. But I can help you get help. We can find a counselor for you, a program for the gambling. I'll pay for all of it. I'll be there with you every step of the way, I promise. There was a harsh, ugly sneer in Kyle's voice when he replied, a sound that was pure Sharon. Oh, right. You want to help me now? Where was all this help when you threw me and Mom out on the street? Just give me the money, Liam. It's the least you owe me. Owe me. There it was again. That poisonous, insidious phrase. The root of all this misery. With a heavy, breaking heart, Liam said no. I love you, Kyle. You're my brother. But I can't do that. I won't. The string of curses that came from the other end of the line was vile, full of a deep, twisted hatred that was shocking to hear secondhand. Kyle accused Liam of everything, of being a selfish coward, of being completely controlled by me, of sitting in his nice house with his perfect family and letting his own brother rot. He ended the call by screaming, "You're dead to me. You hear me? Both of you." Then the line went dead. That was the last time they ever spoke. Liam sat at the kitchen table for a full hour after that call, not moving, just staring at the wood grain, his hands flat on the table. He had tried to offer his brother a lifeline, a real chance to change, and Kyle had spat on it and thrown it back in his face. The door, which had been left ever so slightly ajar in Liam's heart for all these years, was finally slammed shut, bolted, and barricaded for good. He had to accept that the brother he grew up with was gone, replaced by this angry, bitter stranger. The true, devastating cost of it all, the full weight of the tragedy, became clear to me on a perfectly ordinary Tuesday afternoon. I was at the grocery store, the same discount grocery store where Sharon worked. I tried to avoid it, usually, but I was in a hurry and it was the closest one. I was in the cereal aisle, trying to decide between two different brands of Cheerios, when I heard a voice that was both familiar and jarringly out of place. That'll be $24.52. Do you have a loyalty card? My blood ran cold. I froze, my hand hovering over a box of cereal. I peeked around the end of the aisle. And there she was. Sharon. She was at register 3, wearing the store's ill-fitting red vest over a faded, pilled blouse. Her hair, which she had always kept perfectly coiffed, was thinner now, and streaked with gray. Her face, which had once been so animated, was etched with the deep, permanent lines of unhappiness. She looked tired. She looked old. She looked utterly defeated. As I watched, hidden by a tower of toilet paper, a young woman with a toddler in her cart came through the line. The little girl was about Sam's age, with bright eyes and pigtails. As her mother paid, the little girl proudly held up a crumpled dollar bill to Sharon, her small face beaming with pride. "This is for my mommy's food," she said, her voice clear and sweet. Sharon didn't smile. She barely even looked at the child. She snatched the bill from the girl's hand with a brisk, impatient movement, her face a stony, indifferent mask. She processed the transaction with a weary, practiced efficiency, her eyes already looking past them to the next person in line. The young mother, a look of slight embarrassment and disappointment on her face, guided her cart away. In that moment, watching from the shadows of the aisle, I didn't feel anger or resentment. I didn't even feel a sense of vindication. I just felt a wave of profound and overwhelming pity. This woman, who could have been a doting, beloved grandmother to my two beautiful children, was a stranger checking out groceries for other people's families. She could have had a life filled with the chaotic, joyful laughter of Lily and Sam. She could have had warm hugs and messy birthday parties and handmade cards. She could have had the unwavering love and financial support of a son who, despite everything, would have moved heaven and earth for her if she had only been capable of a single ounce of grace, a single moment of self-reflection. She had chosen this. She had chosen bitterness over forgiveness, pride over family, resentment over love. She had lost her home to a fire, a tragedy she couldn't control. But she had burned down her own family with her own two hands, fanning the flames with her victimhood and pride. I backed away slowly, leaving my half-full cart in the middle of the aisle, and walked out of the store. I got into my car and just sat there for a long time, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. The victory I had felt in reclaiming my home, the rightness of Liam's decision, it all felt like ashes in my mouth. There were no winners here. We had all lost. We had just lost in different ways. That night, the image of Sharon at the cash register was burned into my mind. The hollow look in her eyes, the impatient snatch of the dollar bill from a child's hand, it was the portrait of a woman whose soul had withered. When the kids were finally asleep, their soft breathing a gentle rhythm in our quiet house, I found Liam in his office. He wasn't working. He was just sitting in his chair in the dark, staring out the window at the streetlights. The old photo box was closed on his desk. He didn't need to look at the pictures anymore. The memories lived behind his eyes. I came up behind him and wrapped my arms around his shoulders, resting my chin on his head. He didn't seem surprised, as if he had been waiting for me. "I saw her today," I said softly, the words feeling heavy in my mouth. "At the grocery store. She was working." He didn't turn around, but I felt his body tense beneath my arms. He was silent for a long moment. "Is she okay?" he finally asked, his voice thick with an emotion he rarely let surface. I thought for a moment, trying to find the right words, the truest words. "She's alive," I said, because it was the only honest answer I could give. "She looks unhappy. Very, very unhappy." He let out a long, shaky breath that was almost a sob. "I sometimes wonder," he said, his voice barely a whisper, a confession to the darkness. "I play it back in my head all the time. That day. I wonder if there was another way. A different path we could have taken. Something I could have said or done that would have changed things." I thought about it. I truly did. I let myself walk down that painful, alternate path in my mind. I imagined a version of myself who had more patience, more grace. A version who could have tolerated the mess, the disrespect, the constant tension, for just a little longer. A version who didn't demand respect but quietly earned it through endless, martyred service. I pictured months, maybe years, of that life. Me, shrinking smaller and smaller in my own home. My resentment growing into a cancer that would have poisoned my relationship with Liam, with my children, with myself. I saw the relief on his face turning into a permanent, weary resignation. And I thought of Kyle, yelling in my face. I thought of the cold, manipulative way Sharon had twisted every act of kindness into a weapon against me. I thought of the profound peace in our home now, the safety our children felt, the deep, unbreakable strength of my marriage, a strength that had been forged in that very fire. "No," I said, my voice firm with a certainty that had taken me years of guilt and sorrow to find. I squeezed his shoulders. "There wasn't another way. Don't do that to yourself. You did what you had to do. You protected us. You protected our children from growing up in a house filled with that kind of toxicity. And maybe, I added, the thought occurring to me for the very first time, you protected them from a version of me that was about to break into a million angry, bitter pieces. You saved me, too. He reached up and put his hand over mine, squeezing it tightly. We stood there in silence for a long while, a sad, solid unit against the world, two people bound together by love and a shared, permanent sorrow. We had our sanctuary. We had our peace. But we both understood, without needing to say it, that it was a peace built on the ruins of another life, a life that could have been. The question that had haunted me for so long in the lonely hours of the night. Am I the asshole? It no longer mattered. The world isn't divided into heroes and villains, not really. It's just filled with flawed, hurting people making impossible choices. Sharon and Kyle chose pride. They chose victimhood. And we, in response, chose ourselves. We chose our children. We chose our sanity. It was the right choice. I know it was. But every choice has a cost. And the cost of our peace was Liam's family. It's a debt we will be paying for the rest of our lives, in quiet moments of reflection, in the faces of relatives we no longer see, in the empty chairs at our holiday table. Sometimes, when I'm tucking my own children into bed, I think of Sharon in her lonely apartment. I think of Kyle, a man now, lost and angry somewhere out in the world. I feel a pang of sorrow so deep it takes my breath away. I wish them peace. I truly do. But I know that some fires, once they burn hot enough, can never be put out. They just smolder forever, deep in the foundations of your life, a constant, smoky reminder of everything that was lost. Our home is safe. Our family is strong. But we will always live with the ghosts.